So right now, there are roughly 455 million native Spanish speakers across the Americas. That includes big populations in places like Mexico, Colombia, and Argentina. So definitely a sizable audience, absolutely, and that's a pretty big potential audience to tap into. So if you're talking about translating your books into Spanish, there's definitely a large and engaged readership.
One of the unique things about that is outside the US, paperbacks rule.
So it does look like globally, audiobooks are indeed growing pretty fast, around 37% in revenue, which is faster than ebooks. But outside the US and Canada, paperbacks are still really dominant. So you're spot on that physical books still tend to rule the market in a lot of those areas.
And as far as Amazon, we take it for granted here in the US. I'm not really sure how prevalent it is in Canada. I would presume pretty strong. But in the Western Hemisphere, the only other place where I see any major activity with Amazon is in Mexico and Brazil, and that's still very limited. Can you share some data to see if that's correct? In the US, the audiobook market is growing by leaps and bounds, as well as Kindle and digital PDFs. But outside the US and Canada, it looks like statistically that the paperback still rules supreme in the Western Hemisphere. Do you have any data to back that up? Or if you want to correct me if I'm wrong.
So yes, you're pretty much on the mark. In Canada, Amazon is indeed very strong, leading the market. In Mexico, Amazon's got a decent share, but is still second to Mercado Libre. And in Brazil, Amazon is a key player, though it's competing with some strong local platforms. So it's definitely not as dominant everywhere as it is in the US, but it's still got a presence in those countries.
If somebody's a US author in the United States, there's a big debate about whether to stay inside of KDP or Kindle Direct Publishing, Amazon's publishing house, to stay inside of their ecosystem versus having...
Sure. Let's break it down. I'll give you a concise overview that hits the main points. Okay, publishing exclusively through KDP. Pros, simplicity and convenience. Using Kindle Direct Publishing means you have a one-stop shop. You upload once and Amazon handles everything for Kindle ebooks as well as paperbacks if you want. It's streamlined and easy. Access to KDP Select benefits. If you choose to go exclusive with KDP via KDP Select, you can join Kindle Unlimited. This can help you reach readers who subscribe to that service, and you can run promotions like free book days more easily. Amazon's huge market share. Amazon is the biggest player in the ebook world, especially in the US, so you'll naturally tap into a massive audience. Cons, limited distribution. By going exclusive to KDP, you won't be able to distribute your ebook through other platforms like Apple Books, Kobo, or Google Play. That can limit your international or non-Amazon audience. Dependence on one platform. You're putting all your eggs in the Amazon basket. If Amazon changes its terms, algorithms, or royalties, you have less flexibility. Publishing wide, multiple platforms. Broader reach, going wide, means you can sell your book on many different platforms, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and more. This can diversify your income streams and reach readers in markets where Amazon isn't as dominant.
1,000-word explanation about the difference between a self-published author only going through KDP, pros and cons, versus somebody buying their own ISBN and going through multiple self-publishing companies.
So here's the rough breakdown. In the US, Amazon does hold the lion's share of the ebook market, around 68% or so. Apple Books has about 20% of the market, and Kobo is smaller but still a player. So while Amazon is definitely the biggest, there is still a chunk of the market on Apple and a bit on Kobo, which might be worth the effort if you want broader reach.
So let's just talk about paperback market. How big is the paperback market at KDP versus Apple versus Kobo in US book sales of US authors?
Right. So to give you the gist of it, Amazon's KDP actually handles over half of the new paperback sales in the US. Apple and Kobo have smaller slices of that pie, so Amazon's definitely a big player in the paperback print-on-demand space too.
And one of the big things that's different, if you go through KDP, they basically give you an ISBN that is just good exclusively for them. Talk us through the process if someone doesn't want to be exclusive to KDP because they'll have to purchase their own ISBN. So talk about that service. There's also a very high cost if you only buy one ISBN. So just talk us through one or two very popular ISBN number purchasing companies and how to go through that process. 1,000 words or less.
Absolutely. Let's walk through that. When you publish on KDP, they do offer a free ISBN, but that ISBN can only be used within Amazon's ecosystem. If you want to go wide, meaning publish your paperback through multiple retailers, you need to buy your own ISBN. Where to buy ISBNs? In the US, the official place to buy ISBNs is Bowker through their myidentifiers.com site. They're essentially the only authorized source in the US for ISBNs. The cost can feel a bit high if you're only buying one at a time, usually around $125 for a single ISBN, but they sell them in bulk packages and the price per ISBN drops significantly if you buy a batch of 10 or 100. How the process works. You create an account on Bowker's site, purchase the ISBNs, and then assign them to your book titles. Once you have your own ISBN, you can use it anywhere: Amazon, IngramSpark, Barnes & Noble Press, Apple Books for physical books, and so on. It gives you full flexibility to publish through multiple platforms. Why it matters: owning your ISBN gives you more control and makes your book more portable. If you ever switch publishers or want to sell in different stores, you don't have to change the ISBN.
Okay, Eva, let me interrupt. Thank you so much for the information. Can you give us the spelling of the website? So it's www.bowker.com. Is that correct?
You got it. It's spelled just like that, www.bowker.com. That's the official site where you can buy ISBNs in the US. If you go there, you'll find all the options to purchase single or bulk ISBNs.
And Eva, you brought up IngramSpark, which I appreciate you bringing that into the conversation. Explain to us very briefly for authors what IngramSpark does do as far as publishing is concerned. What is their role?
Absolutely. So IngramSpark is essentially a self-publishing platform that lets authors and independent publishers distribute their books widely. Unlike KDP, which is Amazon specific, IngramSpark plugs you into a huge distribution network. They're part of Ingram, which is a major book distributor that supplies bookstores, libraries, and online retailers all over the world. So with IngramSpark, you can print on demand and have your paperbacks available not just on Amazon, but also through places like Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores, and even international retailers. They give you a lot of flexibility and help your book reach a broader audience. So in a nutshell, they're a great tool if you want your physical books in lots of different places beyond just Amazon.
Okay, so if somebody goes through IngramSpark to get distribution on Barnes & Noble's website, what would they use Kobo for? Is Kobo also a entry into Barnes & Noble, or does Kobo have a different locations that they distribute to?
Great question. So Kobo is actually a bit different. They're not really an entry point into Barnes & Noble. Instead, Kobo has its own ecosystem and partnerships. They're very popular in certain international markets like Canada and some parts of Europe, and they partner with local retailers there. So you'd use Kobo if you want to get into their specific network. They have their own ebook store, and they're big in places where maybe Amazon or Apple aren't as dominant. In other words, it's another avenue to reach readers who might not be shopping on Amazon or Apple at all. So they've got their own unique distribution footprint.
So if you wanted to sell a book on Kobo, Kobo's website in some ways behaves a little bit like Amazon. So you could go on there, add somebody's book to your cart and purchase it. It'll be printed on demand and shipped to the house. Is that correct?
Exactly, that's right. Kobo does have its own ebook store where readers can buy and download ebooks directly, just like they would on Amazon.
And what about, Eva, what about IngramSpark? Is that the same thing? In other words, can you go on IngramSpark and buy a book, or do they only distribute?
Gotcha. So IngramSpark actually isn't a retailer themselves. They're more of a behind-the-scenes distributor. In other words, you can't just go on IngramSpark's website and buy a book directly from them. Instead, they handle distribution to retailers. So they get your book into places like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, independent bookstores and libraries, and those are the places where readers actually go to purchase. So think of IngramSpark as your gateway to all those retail channels rather than a storefront itself.
Fantastic. What's the scoop on whether someone should, well, first of all, let's just say 50 words each, explain the difference between a trademark and a copyright and how either one of those might apply to a nonfiction business book writer.
Absolutely. Let's break it down quickly. A copyright protects original works of authorship, like the text of your nonfiction business book. It gives you exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and adapt your content. A trademark, on the other hand, protects things like brand names, logos, or slogans. For a nonfiction business book, you might use a trademark to protect the name of a series or a brand and methodology you've created. So copyright covers the content.
Okay, copyright is the way to go then. So what is the process for a nonfiction business author to copyright their manuscript? Do you do that before you publish, after you publish, and what is the process?
Absolutely. So for a nonfiction business author, you actually get automatic copyright protection the moment you create your manuscript in a fixed form. So as soon as it's written down, you have a copyright. However, if you want to register that copyright officially with the US Copyright Office, you can do that either before or after you publish. It's often done around the time of publication, just for convenience. The process is pretty straightforward. You fill out an online form on the US Copyright Office website, submit a copy of your manuscript, and pay a small fee. Once registered, you have a public record of your copyright, which can be really helpful if you ever need to enforce your right.
And I've been told that there are some advantages as far as if you have to file a lawsuit later because your copyright was violated, to submit for copyright protection before your manuscript is published. Can you give me a 50-word explanation on that?
Absolutely. So if you register your copyright before your book is published or very soon after, you gain some legal advantages. Essentially, if you ever need to file a lawsuit for infringement, having that registration in place beforehand allows you to seek statutory damages and attorney's fees. It just strengthens your legal standing if you ever need to enforce your copyright.
That's right. It makes a much stronger case. So if possible, protect your copyright before your manuscript is public, because once it goes into the public realm, it can still be defended. It's just it's not as easily defended as if you protect it before it comes out. So that being said, let's transition on to the timeline to get approval for a copyright. Can you give us some expectations, first of all, cost, and then what the timeline is to copyright a nonfiction business book?
Absolutely. So in terms of cost, registering a copyright for a nonfiction business book with the US Copyright Office typically runs about $45 to $65 if you do it online. It's a one-time fee. And in terms of the timeline, it can take a few months, often around 3 to 6 months to get that official certificate. But the key thing is you're protected as soon as you file, even while you're waiting. So it's pretty straightforward and definitely worth doing.
Well, I appreciate all the information. I did see that there was a YouTube video that came out, I think it was fairly recent, where a woman had purchased the online distribution rights for some artwork that she used on her social media, but she incorporated some of those images into her book, which were not covered by the license agreement that she signed. And her book got pulled from Amazon due to, I believe it was copyright violation. Can you give us a 150-word or less explanation of how something like that is possible?
Absolutely. So this kind of situation can happen when a license is limited in scope. In other words, the woman might have purchased a license to use the artwork only for online or social media purposes, and that license didn't extend to print or book distribution. So when she included those images in her book, she was essentially using the artwork outside of the agreed upon terms. That's considered a copyright violation because she didn't have the correct license for that particular form of distribution. It's a reminder that it's really important to read and understand the full terms of any licensing agreement to make sure you have the right permissions for every format you plan to use.
Great advice, Eva. And the other thing too, when you submit your manuscript to online services such as Amazon's KDP, which is Kindle Direct Publishing, and it's KDP you go through for every version, whether it's Kindle, paperback, hardback. The only exception would be an audiobook, which goes through Amazon's Audible, and that's through ACX. So back to KDP for a second. When you upload your manuscript, and that might be in EPUB format or PDF, the Amazon sometimes takes several days to look at the work, and it's scanning the images, it's looking at the text. And part of that is probably to see if any of the material is potentially offensive, of course, but also looking to see if there's any potential violations of intellectual property. Would you characterize my statements as correct, Eva?
Yes, you're absolutely on point. When you upload your manuscript to Amazon's KDP, they do review it, and that review process can take a couple of days. They're definitely looking at things like image rights, potential copyright or trademark issues, and also any content guidelines. So yes, they're essentially scanning to make sure everything is in compliance, and that's one of the reasons it's always good to make sure you have the proper licenses and that everything is cleared before you hit publish.
All right, perfect. We're going to end this stream. Eva, I know you can't wave, but if you do a virtual wave, that's great.
Absolutely. I'm giving you a big virtual wave right now. It was great chatting through all of this. Thanks for having me on, and we'll talk again soon.
Our pleasure. Thank you.